Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie and we are in the first week of June and it's time to start pruning my fruit trees. Now I follow the method called Grow Little Fruit Tree, and I also follow the Dave Wilson backyard orcharding method. Now I've done this for, well, since the early 90s. I actually took a class from Ed Lovio, the same person who taught Ann Ralph in the book. That was back in Ojai at one of their test orchards that I was able to take that class, and I have done this method ever since. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at several of my trees and talk about how we're going to prune them and why I prune them in June. So let's go look at my pluot first and talk about that. Now these are my pluots. There's two of them planted in the same hole. Let's show you the trunks. And I'll link a video above on when I planted these. But you can see that they're planted close together. And I want to keep these around 6 feet tall. So we're going to go and just take off everything at the top until they are 6 feet tall. Let me show you some other older trees and talk about what we're going to do with them. These right here are my Columnar apples. They've hit about 8 feet tall, but I think what we're going to do with these, even though we're using the backyard orcharding method, is because they're Columnar trees, we are not going to prune them. We're just going to let them go, see how tall they get. They're supposed to top out at 10 feet and see what happens. Now, there may come a time later when I decide to prune them shorter, but this year is not going to be that time. This is another pluot tree that's being slowly gobbled up by my blue spruce. These blue spruce, when I moved here in 2007, were 8 feet tall. They are baby blue eyes spruce, and they are now probably topping 30 feet tall. They're only supposed to hit 20, but you know, they do what they want to do. And they're quite wide. But anyway, they have met in the center. This is the first time, and I've been waiting for that time when they meet in the center, and they've met in the center now. But in between that, we have another pluot. This is a dapple dandy pluot. When it was planted 6 years ago, there was about, I'd say a good 8 to 10 feet between these two trees. They've grown so much in the last few years. But we're just going to continue pruning this. You can see the amount of new growth on this. We have a good 3 to 4 feet of new growth that we're going to take off. And we're going to take this off, and we're going to take this all the way back down to where we pruned it last year. And you could kind of see where the long skinny branches are, where they start. That's the level that we're going to take it down to, because I want to be able to reach the fruit. Although this year, for some reason, none of my pluots bore any fruit. My plum tree did, but my pluots didn't bear any fruit this year for some reason. They didn't even flower. Now these are my apples, and these were a good test subject. I had been very, very careful with my pruning for many, many years. These were planted in 2007, and this is 2025. Actually, they were planted in 2008, and this is 2025. And I had been very, very careful how much I took off my apple trees to try and keep them short. And I had gotten to the point where I only needed to prune them once a year to keep them at the height I wanted, which is about 10 feet. Now these are on a very, very steep slope. The top line up there is where the slope ends, and it starts down here. So these aren't really as tall as they look, but they're a lot taller than they used to be. What had happened is I'd spent many years training these to keep them small, and because we live in Utah in a short growing season, I was able to, with careful pruning, not put too much energy into new growth. But I do pruning classes, and I had a friend who had very rightfully felt like he needed to completely clean these trees out, and I let him do it. And since that point, we've had uncontrolled growth, and I've been needing to prune them in the summer also to keep them the height that I want. But I think this year we're not going to do the June pruning. We're going to prune these in at the end of July, is I think when we're going to prune them, and see if we could control the growth that way. But there are 2 apples. Let's go over here. 2 apples and a pear. The pear is bearing heavily. The apple trees are in their off year because these are alternate bearing apple trees. They bore the fruit last year, but not this year. And then down under here, I don't know, maybe you can see it, but there are 3 trunks down there planted close together. Up at the top here, we have my cherry tree. This is on a standard rootstock, and it should be up around 40 feet tall at this point, but I prune it down to 12 feet every year, and I only prune it once a year. And I do end up needing to have an arborist come do it because it's just too tall for me at this point. But we always end up taking off probably a good 8 feet of it every year. But we're not going to prune that one. There goes my little friend quail. Really mad at me now because I walked into the garden, which is their domain. Now it's hard to see my plum because it's behind the cherry tree, but this plum tree, I also only prune it once a year, and we keep it a little bit shorter than the cherry tree. But even though the pluots aren't bearing fruit, maybe you can see that the plum is bearing this year. And then sadness of all sadness, I had 2 peaches and a nectarine also planted in 2007, and they succumbed to cytospora, which is a bacterial disease, and borers. And so we had to cut those down, and I'm still trying to get the time and the energy to remove the trunks here and then decide what we're going to do with this space. If we're going to plant more fruit trees or another fruit tree or put in more garden beds, it may end up happening next year, but we'll see. Anyway, so we're not going to have to worry about pruning my peach trees this year. This is my brand new dwarf mulberry. It's supposed to only get 10 feet tall and 8 feet wide. We're going to try and keep this one around 6 feet. I am not going to do any pruning on this one because it was planted while it was fully leafed out, and it was just barely planted, and we have the heat of the summer hitting it. So this one we're just going to leave. My Asian pear, I am a little worried about it. We're not getting the growth that I think we should get on it, and I'm not going to be pruning this one. There might be something going on with the roots down at the bottom, but we do have a ton of Asian pears on it, so at least it's bearing fruit. We've already done what I'm going to do with my fig trees, and I'll link a video about tipping the branches in June. I always do that at the very beginning of June, and you can see where I tipped it right here, and you can see the figs already forming. So what that does, especially in areas where you have a short growing season, if you pull the very, very tips off of the end of the branches, like there's one right here, let me show you how I do it. You can see this branch right here still has its growing tip. I usually wait till it's about 1 foot long, and then I just pinch the tips off. It does bleed. It does bleed a little bit, but that's okay. We're just going to let it do its thing, and then it should start forming fruit. So it takes all of the energy that's going into that growth tip to add more growth and puts it into side shoots, which is where the figs form. This is my medlar tree. We're not going to be touching that. I only prune that once a year. It's a naturally small tree, and I don't mind the height on it. That's about, I'd say, 10 feet tall, and it's good enough for me right now. My pawpaw trees, we're not going to prune. They're very slow growing and very temperamental. They're not getting enough water. I'm still trying to give them enough water. Since I switched this all out from lawn to drought-tolerant perennials, I put a sprinkler on these once a year, once a week for a good 30 minutes, and water them really deeply once a week. But anyway, let's see if it's forming any fruit. It had started forming fruit and then started losing the fruit. It doesn't have a pollinator. I usually get about 10 fruit a year. See, we're getting at least 2. So there's 2 of them right there. There might be more in there, but we do usually get about 10 fruit off of it. What we are going to be pruning, though, are the almond trees. This is a little 2-year-old, well, maybe this is its 3rd year. It's probably its 3rd year. We're going to take the very tips off of it to force it to branch out more. This is another almond tree that's in its 4th year. We're going to take the tips off of this one because I would like it a little bit taller. And then this is my hardy pistachio, a very fun, rare specimen. But I want to keep this one around 6 to 8 feet tall, so we're going to go in and take off the tallest branches up there at the top. It's been slow enough growing, I haven't had to summer prune too much, but this year we're going to be summer pruning it. This one's about 8 years old, well maybe 7 years old, and it has not had enough time to flower yet. So we don't even know if it's male or female. So hopefully we'll figure that out soon. So now that we've talked a little bit about what we're going to prune, let's talk a little bit about what we are not going to do. During June, what I do not do is go in and thin out crossing branches. I don't go out and thin out the interior. The only thing that I do is reduce height. When it comes to pruning out the interior and shaping the tree, I do that in the early spring. I feel no need to really go in and do that in the summer, especially if there's no fruit on the tree, because there's no fruit on this tree. You know, if there is a lot of fruit on the tree, sometimes I'll go in and thin things out a little bit so the fruit gets some sunshine, but I would much rather just control the height. Number one, the tree doesn't really need it this time of year to go in and thin it out. And then number two, this is June. There's a lot of other things going on. And if I make this too long a process, too involved of a process, I will end up not wanting to do it and put it off for too long. So I need to make it as easy as possible and something that I'm willing to just come in and do. Now I'm 5'2½", and the way that I choose the height of my trees is I just reach up as high as I can, pull the branches down, and prune them at that height. And that way I don't need to use a ladder, I don't need to use any excess energy to do it. I just prune them as high as I can reach. And you can choose the height that you want your trees, and don't feel bad about whatever height that is, because that's what this is for. It's to tailor it to you, so that you can be able to prune your trees, so that you can be able to thin them, so you can be able to harvest them, drape covering over them if needed, spray them if needed. This is for your benefit. It's not for anybody else's, so you get to choose the height. So I'm going to show you how high I'm going to prune these. So I'm going to reach up, try not to squish any ripe strawberries. I'm going to just choose a few branches that are right there, and I am going to, well, let me look at it, see what height I want it. Yep, that's the height I want it. That's it. So now that we've chosen the height, we're going to come in and take all the branches to that height. If there's any branch like this one that's going to start blocking any paths, then I may want to either take that one completely out, or maybe take the outside branches off. That's the only shaping that I would really do, though, is to take branches off that are impeding any paths. So I'm going to take those off. Let's get the rest of this pruned, because I do have another appointment I've got to get to. Get this done as quickly as possible. And right here, I'm just anticipating which branches are going to go into the path and just taking those off now. Gather up another bunch, take them to the height that I want them. Another thing this is accomplishing is I usually get aphids right at the top. I feel aphids raining down on me, and it's kind of gross. But I don't generally get aphids in the center. Here, I got one in between my eye. I don't usually get aphids in the center of the tree. They're always at the top, so this is removing the aphids. Now, I leave the aphids, I don't spray for them, and generally speaking, around this time of year, I start seeing ladybugs take over, and then the aphids disappear. So this tree is looking a lot better than it did earlier. Okay, so this is what aphid damage looks like. The leaves get all shiny, that's the honeydew, they get curled. Let me see if I can find any aphids in here. You know, I think the ladybugs have taken care of them. We just have the damage left. I'm really not seeing any aphids right now. So there we go. They're roughly all the same height. Any branches that were incurring into areas that I didn't want them are taken off. And this is going to be good. This is going to also reduce the vigor of growth next year. Let's go look at the one under the spruce trees. Over here, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to grab the tall branches, cut them off to the height that I want. And in 2 minutes, we have this tree where I want it also. The almond trees are going to be even quicker because we're just tipping them. So we're just going to take those, just the tips off. Now, I've had several people be concerned that I'm not following proper pruning practices. I'm not looking for an outward facing bud and pruning it very carefully because this is June. These trees are growing really quickly. By August, we're going to have the same amount of growth that I'm going to have to take off as I took off now. And they can seal over these wounds very, very quickly in the summer. In the spring, I very much follow the proper pruning practices. I don't prune if it's going to be wet. I also don't prune if it's going to be wet in the summer. And I always choose outward facing buds. I make clean cuts. I am really careful then. But the summer, it's not as important when you're doing the summer pruning. The important part is getting it done. So that's what we're doing today. One of the other proper pruning practices that I am not that worried about is that we are doing heading cuts. And we normally don't do heading cuts on trees. It's very bad for trees, other than fruit trees. When we do heading cuts on fruit trees, we're trying to encourage that side growth so they get bushier. The reason we do that is we want to be able to continuously thin out unproductive branches and encourage new fruiting branches. If this were an ornamental tree, I would not be trying to size control. I only do that on fruit trees and nut trees. So that's basically what we're doing here with this tree, is we're trying to get it to branch out, and I'm doing that by tipping the branches. Not really paying attention to, facing outward branches. Some people do, but like I said, I need to be able to have the energy and the desire to do this, and taking a lot of time in pruning this time of year is just going to make me not want to do it. So we're just cutting wherever I feel like it's needed. And we'll correct any bad pruning cuts in next spring. 2 minutes later, my almond trees are done. Let's go get the hardy pistachio done now. Now, because this is such a rare tree, there's not very many people that have them here. It's a seedling from a tree at Utah State University. I have not been pruning these much. They do have a very slow growth, but this year we're getting some tall growth up behind me, so we're just going to take that tall growth off. If I can get the sun out of my eyes enough to see it. Now, I was a little more selective with my pruning cuts on this one because there weren't that many cuts and because it doesn't get pruned that often. So you can do it any way you want. If you have the time and energy to be very careful in your pruning, you can go in and reduce height and shape the trees and do proper pruning cuts in the summer. It's just not as necessary as it is in the spring. Now, it took a half an hour and my summer pruning is done. I would love to hear if you've tried this summer pruning method, tried keeping your fruit trees small, and if so, what do you do and what time of year do you do it? So hopefully this video has been helpful for you. If it has been helpful, I hope you like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.